Sometimes I like to pee in my girlfriend and call her daddy's little water balloon.
Vampdaddyevil is an adult man pushing 30 who built an online identity by leaning into the exact accusations that most people would run from. Grooming jokes, age play, ownership fantasies, missing ex-girlfriend lore, stalking charges, screenshots where he openly admits to manipulating teenagers and calls it a process. And when the backlash came, he didn't retreat, he doubled down, smiled into the camera and told everyone they were just jealous of him. I want to hear how your voice sounds when you scream my name. Are you planning on f***ing me or murdering me? Whatever makes me come faster. This is the same person who publicly said he views an 18-year-old girl not as a girlfriend, but as a daughter and a pet. The same person who admitted he waited for a teenager's birthday so he could immediately buy her explicit content. The same guy who posted videos implying police questioning over a missing ex, then followed it up with jokes about dismemberment, dolls in pieces, and never being found. And somehow, none of that slowed him down. It became part of his brand. If you think this is just edgy humor or rage bait, that excuse collapses the moment you see the private messages. Messages where he brags about grooming. Messages where he weaponizes trauma, and fear. Messages where he threatens to show up at someone's home. Messages where he says being kind is just a setup before the real damage begins. What makes this story hard to look away from is not just how far it goes, but how openly it happens. This is not hidden in dark corners of the internet. This is TikTok lives, comment sections full of minors, repost romanticizing control, violence, and ownership. And yet, before the persona, before the doll metaphors and police jokes and cult-like followers calling him a giga-chad, there was a beginning. And to understand how someone ends up here, you have to follow the trail exactly as it unfolded. From the first harmless post to the point where the line between performance and real harm stops existing at all.
Don't you want me like I want you, baby? Don't you need me like I need?
Before the name Vampdaddyevil meant anything at all, there was just Eric Grion, an adult man already brushing up against 30, long past the age where teenage audiences should even be a consideration, let alone a target. In his earliest stretch on TikTok, there was no overt shock factor, no open references to grooming, no ownership fantasies, no missing persons jokes. What existed instead was a fairly standard online persona that could have gone unnoticed entirely. His page was built around fitness and self-image, gym clips, lifting videos, shirtless angles, the kind of content designed to frame discipline and physical dominance. Alongside that ran a heavy goth and emo aesthetic, dark clothing, alternative styling, metal industrial vibes, and the familiar language of the alt subculture. He positioned himself as a part of that scene, someone hardened, misunderstood, edgy but still palatable. At this stage, the content was not especially controversial, it was performative, but nothing really alarming. Mixed into his early era were posts referencing a brief battle with cancer. These were quieter, more vulnerable uploads that invited sympathy and concern. They helped humanize him and gave his audience a reason to see him as someone who'd suffered, someone who had survived something serious. It's important to note this phrase because it establishes contrast. The account was not born in chaos. It was not immediately hostile or sexualized. It was the kind of page that could have stayed in the lane of fitness motivation, alternative culture, and personal resilience, and all that normal stuff. This is what makes the later shift hard to reconcile with, because Eric started from a place of relative normalcy, with an audience that was growing slowly and organically. The foundation was already there. By early to mid-2023, the tone of Eric's online presence began to change in a noticeable and deliberate way. The fitness clips and alternative aesthetics were still there, but they were no longer the point. What started creeping in was provocation, statements designed less to express an opinion and more to spark outrage. Content that felt engineered to irritate, polarize, and even pull a reaction out of whoever happened to be watching. He began openly aligning himself with right-wing politics, something he knew was deeply unpopular within golf and alternative subcultures. He voiced support for Donald Trump, framed himself as a contrarian with his own scene, and leaned into the idea of being persecuted for his views rather than questioned for them. The backlash was immediate, and instead of retreating, he embraced it. Around the same period, Eric publicly defended Lucifer Valentine, a filmmaker widely criticized for producing graphic, fetishized centered on women. This was not a neutral or accidental reference. It was a calculated stance. By defending a figure already associated with extreme content, Eric positioned himself further outside social norms and closer to controversy. It signaled a willingness to excuse or reframe violent material as art, provocation, or misunderstood expression, themes that would later resurface far more aggressively in his own content. From here, the persona hardened. He began styling himself as intentionally unsettling, evil by design, someone who enjoyed being disliked, someone who wanted viewers to feel uncomfortable. The captions became sharper, the tone more antagonistic. He stopped trying to be relatable and started trying to be infamous. Any attention became acceptable attention, and outrage was no longer a side effect, but the goal. As the ragebait phase settled in, Eric's content took on a more focused and unsettling direction. The provocation was no longer just political or cultural. It became personal, intimate, and explicitly about power. He began reframing himself not simply as an edgy internet figure, but as a specific type of man with a specific role. The protector, the authority, the older figure who knows better. Gym imagery became central to this shift. Nearly everything was filtered through physical dominance. Weightlifting clips, wide stances, low camera angles, and exaggerated displays of size and strength were no longer just about fitness. They were part of the narrative. He was presenting himself as someone built to loom, to guard, to control. The visual language was clear, even when the captions were vague. Big body, strong arms, silent implication of safety mixed with threat. Alongside this, he began speaking about women in a way that stripped them of their agency, while pretending to elevate them.
When I see a girl that I like, and when I'm with them, and believe me, you will know if I like them, I will let you all know that I like them. I refer to them as a doll, not in a dehumanization type, but in the sense that they transcend humanity, like there's something so much more than that. And yes, I do want to dress them up, and I do want to own them like they are a doll.
He described them as fragile, delicate, easily damaged, not equals, not partners, but objects requiring careful handling. This framing was never neutral. Fragility became justification. If someone is breakable, then ownership becomes protection. What made this phase particularly effective for engagement was how it blended attraction with unease. He openly enforced DDLG dynamics and spoke about attraction to littles without hesitation, framing it as a preference rather than a warning sign. This was not a slip of the tongue or an isolated comment. It was a recurring theme, repeated across videos, captions, and responses, woven directly into how he describes relationships and desire. He attempted to sanitize the framing by borrowing a therapeutic language, insisting that these dynamics were misunderstood or misrepresented. But the way he spoke out about partners told a different story. He's into age play, a cheater, and so much more. I'll send you a link to the thread his ex made about him. I've literally never cheated. Whenever pushback surfaced, Eric defaulted to a familiar defense. He claimed that none of this was dehumanizing. He insisted that calling someone a doll or a pet was a form of affection, that ownership was symbolic, that control was mutual. But these explanations collapsed under the weight of his own words. He did not speak about partnership. He spoke about possession. One person above, one person below.
I know you belong to some.
One comment even hinted that he definitely had a crime documentary in his future. Here before the crime documentary, the contradiction sat at the center of everything he said. He denied stripping humanity away while repeatedly doing exactly that. He framed dependency as romance, submission as safety, infantilization as care, and crucially, he placed himself in the role of authority, protector, and decision-maker, while casting others as smaller, quieter, and easier to shape. This was no longer just edgelord behavior. It was a worldview, one where intimacy required imbalance, where closeness depended on control, and where youth and vulnerability were not incidental traits, but desired ones. By this point, the mask was not slipping, it was being removed on purpose. The moment Eric crossed from niche controversy into widespread scrutiny was this post, set to the song Little Girls by Oingo Boingo. In a now deleted post, he uploaded a series of images paired with that audio, and it immediately became his most viral piece of content to date. The song choice was deliberate, especially given his already public fixation on age play and DDLG themes. Initially, instead of deleting the post or disengaging, Eric leaned into the attention. He uploaded a response stating, "I'm not going to groom any of you."
Yeah, so I didn't expect this video to for photos to blow up. 5 seconds in, I'm already messed up. So I didn't expect these photos to really blow up or get the attention they did. I appreciate it, don't get me wrong, but I'm sorry, I'm not actually in the minds. I'm not going to groom any of you, and I know that sounds crazy to say, like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to groom you, but I'm seriously getting so many comments like this, like, I'm sorry, guys, to know, Vampdaddyevil, I think he's still a thing.
The phrasing alone raised more questions than it answered. Most people do not feel compelled to publicly announce that they are not going to commit serious wrongdoings. The statement did not reassure, it amplified concern, and rather than letting the issue fade, he continued to address it directly, again and again. Each response pulled more eyes to the situation. Each attempt at clarification reopened the conversation. He framed himself as misunderstood, as unfairly targeted, as someone being accused simply for existing loudly online. But the repeated focus on grooming discourse, especially when paired with his prior content, only deepened suspicion. Instead of distancing himself from the allegations, he centered them. He made them part of the narrative. As his audience grew, a consistent pattern began to emerge around money and emotional leverage. Eric openly posted about sending cash to girls online, framing it as generosity or care. He referred to it as spoiling women, presenting himself as a benefactor who rewards affection and attention, and submission. Screenshots and videos showed him bragging about transferring money, reinforcing the image of himself as someone willing to bankroll people who stayed close to him. This was not framed as casual gifting. It was positioned as access. He leaned into the idea of being an ATM for fans, a provider who could step in when others could not. The subtext was clear. Financial support was tied to emotional proximity, loyalty, and compliance. It was another way to establish dependency. The makeup of his audience made this more troubling. His comment sections and reposts were filled with girls openly identifying as mentally unwell, unstable, or struggling. Many were visibly young, some underage, others just barely legal. Instead of discouraging this demographic, he appeared to cultivate it. He interacted with them, validated them, and amplified content that leaned into vulnerability and distress. In this environment, money functioned as a tool of influence. Offering financial help to people already dealing with instability created an uneven power dynamic. It blurred the lines between support and control. He was not just sending money, he was positioning himself as someone they needed, someone who could rescue, spoil, or stabilize them if they stayed close enough. The pattern repeated across platforms. Public post, private messages, and repost content all reinforced the same structure. He gives, they attach. And because this was happening in front of an audience that skewed young and emotionally fragile, it becomes impossible to separate generosity from manipulation. The Ray arc is where Eric's behavior stops being abstract and becomes concrete. Ray was already a known figure in alternative TikTok spaces before she even interacted with him directly. She was infamous for racist behaviors, slurs, and controversy. And she was also a minor during the earliest phase of Eric's attention. That detail matters because his interest did not begin after she became an adult. It started well before. While Ray was still under 18, Eric was already present in her orbit.
Yeah, I did. And I want to give a special shout out to all the people who bullied her and put her self-esteem down to make it easy for me.
He was a frequent presence on her TikTok live streams and was reportedly one of her top gifters, consistently sending money and boosting her visibility. This was not passive viewership. It was active financial support and sustained attention directed at a teenage girl by a man approaching 30. At the same time, he was watching her controversies unfold, tracking her reputation, and inserting himself into narratives about her being bullied or misunderstood. When Ray turned 18, the shift was immediate. There was no cooling off period, no boundary reset. As soon as she launched an OnlyFans account, Eric subscribed right away. That action marked the transition from distant fixation to direct involvement. Not long after, he began contacting her directly, and the two entered a brief but volatile relationship. The speed of that progression is critical. It reinforced the perception that he had been waiting. I've said it multiple times before. Ray makes me happy. She'll always be the most beautiful girl in the world to me as long as she's in my life. Their interactions escalated quickly. Messages exchanged during this period were possessive, aggressive, and deeply controlling. Honestly, I get so fucking jealous and annoyed thinking about any guy you f***ed around with before me. I'm better than Landon, Kevin, Joey, Dredd, etc. Look at me. I'm a god compared to them. They didn't even come close to me. They didn't even compare to me. And I get annoyed thinking about the guys who you because I want to go further and harder than any other guy. He framed himself as someone who knew better than her, someone entitled to guide, mold, and dominate her. He expressed jealousy over her past, resentment that other men had access to her before him, and anger that he was not the first to exert influence over her. At multiple points, he described his behavior towards her as intentional and strategic. presenting kindness as a temporary mask rather than genuine care. The private messages exchanged during the Ray situation removed any remaining ambiguity about intent. In leaked private messages, Eric does not merely flirt or posture. He explicitly frames his behavior as grooming. I want to mark you. I want to have my name on you. I want to own you completely. Not even gonna lie, I'm jealous because I want to have been the one to you. I'm you now, in a way. He acknowledges that she'd been before and expresses resentment that other men reached her first. Rather than seeing that history as harm, he treats it as competition. He positions himself as the one who should have been there to shape her, guide her, and control her from the beginning. In these messages, he repeatedly asserts dominance and ownership. He tells her that he will own her entirely. He speaks as though her autonomy is temporary and conditional. Sexual language is woven directly into control, with coercive undertones that blur consent into obligation. He drifts between praise and degradation, alternating reassurance with insults, calling her stupid enough to be into the dynamic he's proposing. He also weaponizes her mental health against her. Her history of self-harm, emotional instability, and past trauma are not treated as vulnerabilities to protect. You remember what happened last time you tried moving on with another guy, right? What happened every time? They can't handle you. You get hurt. You harm yourself. You have to watch your world crumble down again and again. I'm different. You don't fight with me. I calm you down. I stay with you no matter how bad it is. I take care of you. You need me, Ray. Be a good girl for me. How many more times do you need to get hurt until you realize that? Besides, you don't really want to watch me go balls deep into another woman, do you? He references her lowest moments to argue that she needs him, that others will always fail her, and that resistance only leads to more pain. He frames himself as the only stable option while simultaneously destabilizing her sense of self. One of the most alarming elements of these messages is the inclusion of her home address. Tell me if the address is right. I want to spoil my little girl. Let me f***ing spoil you. I'm better than anyone you've ever had, and I'm going to own you entirely. Stop f***ing around. If you don't tell me whether or not that's right, I'm going to get mad. He drops it into conversation and demands confirmation, tying his emotional state to her response. Even when phrased casually, the act of referencing where she lives introduces fear and pressure into an already unequal dynamic. The relationship deteriorated just as fast as it began. Ray eventually blocked him, cutting off direct contact. Eric responded publicly, not by backing away, but by reframing the dynamic in even more disturbing terms.
Go ahead and talk about the whole Ray situation. There seems to be a lot of anger, disdain, and misinformation going on around everywhere. So I want to go ahead and clear this up. I do not view Ray as a girlfriend. I view her more like a daughter. I view her more like a pet. I really hope this can go ahead and clear some things up for you guys.
He claimed that she was never a girlfriend at all, but rather something closer to a daughter or pet. Instead of distancing himself from the implications, he leaned into them. This arc crystallized patterns that had been visible earlier, but were easier to dismiss when abstract. Ray was not an isolated incident. She was simply the first case where the timeline, the age gap, the money, and the language all line up in a way that could not be ignored. He follows with this post, meant to sound reassuring, but lands as unsettling. He insists that she's not in trouble. He says Daddy is not mad. It's okay that you blocked me. I know you didn't mean it. You're not in trouble. Daddy isn't mad at you. He's right here when you're ready. He frames her absence as temporary, implying that she'll come back when she's ready. There's no acknowledgement of boundaries, no acceptance of rejection, only the assumption that distance is a phase. The story is rewritten in a way that preserves his sense of authority and ownership, rather than respecting her choice to leave. Stalking is not an allegation that exists on the margin of Eric's story. It's something that he openly talks about, repeatedly and without shame. Across multiple posts, he references having several stalking charges, recounts court experiences, and alludes to restraining orders issued against him. These are not framed as regrets or consequences. They are treated casually, almost like milestones. Woven into his online persona is proof of how extreme and misunderstood he claims to be. Rather than distancing himself from this history, he leans into it. He jokes about going to court. He mocks the legal system. He implies that restraining orders are signs of unfinished business rather than boundaries. In doing so, he reframes legal protection as romantic ambiguity. This posture turns stalking into a kind of hobby, something to brag about, something to bait reactions. He uses it as rage bait, knowing that references to legal trouble, obsession, and pursuit will draw engagement. The seriousness of his behavior is stripped away and replaced with sarcasm and provocation. But the underlying actions do not disappear simply because they are joked about. The pattern escalates with his fixation on another TikTok figure, known as Dagger. This obsession mirrors earlier dynamics, but takes on a more theatrical and unsettling form. Eric begins posting videos featuring framed photographs of Dagger that are visibly stained with questionable substances. He films himself asking for advice on how to clean the frames, treating the situation as bizarre humor while refusing to explain how they became dirty in the first place. According to Dagger, the behavior extended far beyond online posts. Dagger alleged that Eric stalked him directly and escalated harassment by mailing broken doll parts to his grandmother. The use of dolls is significant. It ties into Eric's repeated metaphors about ownership, disposal, and control. And it introduces a symbolic layer that feels deliberately threatening. Sending dismembered doll parts to a family member is a message. What stands out in both the Ray situation and the Dagger fixation is consistency. The same elements repeat: obsession, refusal to respect boundaries, doubling down when ignored. Eric dares people to take him seriously and then mocks them when they do. By this point in the timeline, stalking is no longer an accusation made by critics. It's a behavior he normalized within his own narrative. Something he references, reenacts, and trivializes, even as the consequences pile up. His next would be on Kaylee, the flower girl, and it follows the same structure as earlier arcs. Kaylee was significantly younger than Eric and already known online for instability, financial struggle, and relying on the internet donations to survive. That vulnerability was not incidental. It was the entry point. Eric began contacting her repeatedly across multiple platforms. When one message went unanswered, he moved on to another app. When that failed, he tried again somewhere else. He positioned himself as a solution to her problems, offering housing, stability, and care, presenting himself as a safe option in contrast to her chaotic life. The language mirrored what he'd used before. He would take care of her, he would provide. He knew what she needed better than she did. What makes this behavior especially telling is that it continued even after she didn't respond. Silence did not stop him. He openly acknowledged that he was pushing, that he was aware of how it looked, and he was doing it anyways. You're only posting about Kaylee the flower girl for attention. No, I genuinely want to have ownership and control over her, and keep her like a pet. This is a good and mutually beneficial thing. However, as it would provide her with stability and allow her to heal and feel safe without having to worry about things becoming chaotic and ruining her life again. At the same time, he began posting about her publicly. Images appeared of Kaylee placed inside of picture frames, surrounded by props that carried explicit power symbolism. Hand restraints, collars, objects associated with ownership and control. These are not neutral aesthetics. They echoed the same language he had used privately with other girls, now displayed openly for an audience. What he wanted was possession, even if it came without her permission. Kaylee was not single during this period. She had a boyfriend, and Eric made efforts to undermine that relationship. He posted himself as the better option, the more stable presence, the one that truly understood her. This was not subtle. He framed her partner as an obstacle to their future. The most disturbing backdrop to everything we've discussed today is the missing ex-girlfriend case, because it runs parallel in his online behavior. Eric has openly stated that one of his former partners disappeared under unclear circumstances. According to him, police questioned him about her disappearance, and he acknowledged he was one of the last people she was around before she went missing. He publicly claimed that investigators advised him, through legal counsel, to reduce or stop his online activity while the situation was being looked into. Instead of treating this as a serious and sobering moment, he turned it into content. Thank you to all the people who support me and think that I'm hot. I will resume posting again at a later time, likely within 2 months. He filmed videos referencing the situation with a casual tone, inserting jokes about people finding him attractive and treating the investigation like an inconvenience, rather than a crisis. Even while insisting he had nothing to do with the disappearance, he framed himself as adjacent to it in a way that kept attention on him. The gravity of a missing person was flattened into another storyline in his feed. What matters most is what happened next. He did not stay offline. He did not step back for months. Roughly 12 days after claiming he'd been advised to stop posting, he returned to TikTok anyways. There was no visible pause for reflection, no change in tone, no attempt to disengage from controversy. Rather than distancing himself from young women or power-charged dynamics, he shifted directly into content centered on Ray. The timing is right. The return to posting and the escalation of fixation on an 18-year-old happened almost back to back. Even if one assumes the most egregious interpretation, that he was not involved in his ex's disappearance, his behavior afterward is still revealing. The missing ex-girlfriend case is never resolved in his narrative. It's left hanging, referenced just enough to keep people unsettled, then overshadowed by new targets and new drama, and the scrutiny around him intensified. Eric's content took a turn that was darker and more unsettling than simple shock humor. He began posting and reposting material that leaned heavily into violent allegory. "You're dating for marriage. I'm dating to tell someone on the deep web. We're not the same." These were not vague references. They repeatedly implied acts like killing, dismemberment, keeping trophies from victims, and even consuming human remains. While often framed as jokes or edgy reposts, the themes were consistent and fixated violence was kind of central to his content. Alongside the language and the imagery, there is a literal fixation that runs through Eric's content dolls. Not figurative dolls in the abstract sense alone, but physical objects he repeatedly shows, references, and builds symbolism around. He collects posable anime-style dolls that are child-sized in proportion and designed to be taken apart. Head, limbs, torsos, all detachable. These dolls are centered, filmed, framed, and returned to again and again. He posts about dolls breaking, about dolls becoming damaged or used up, about how to properly dispose of them once they're no longer intact. In several videos, he describes separating the head from the body, isolating pieces, and making the remains easier to manage by breaking them down further. The language mirrors his earlier metaphors about people. What makes this symbolism disturbing is consistency. The same man who calls women dolls, the same man who talks about owning them, trolling them, and discarding them once they're damaged. The same man who uses doll imagery to joke about disposal, separation, and erasure. These are not disconnected ideas. They reinforce each other. In multiple posts, he speaks about disposal logistics as though they are practical concerns. Separating identifying parts, making them easier to carry, ensuring things are not easily recognized later. Even when framed as metaphor or dark humor, the specificity is unsettling. It goes beyond vague shock value into detailed fixation. The dolls are not props, they are stand-ins. As the scrutiny around him intensified, Eric began folding law enforcement into his online persona, the same way he had folded everything else. He claimed that police searched his home, and that his Discord messages were examined by authorities.
I just had police and private investigators come to my apartment all because some Discord messages I sent, like hello WTF.
Rather than treating this as a moment to slow down or clarify, he spoke about it casually, almost boastfully, as if being investigated added credibility to the character he was playing. Around the same time, he began to vaguely reference the existence of assault-related allegations. He did not explain them, he did not deny them, he did not provide context. He simply floated the idea into the public space and moved on. "Sorry for the sporadic posts. I'm beating allegations." This ambiguity functioned the same way his other content did. It kept people guessing, unsettled, and engaged, while allowing him to avoid accountability by never fully addressing anything. Despite everything, he continues posting, even as legal references pile up, even as the moral implications of his content become harder to ignore. And as long as the platform allows it, he appears willing to keep escalating, daring consequences to arrive faster.